first of all, I found it excruciatingly difficult to find the flow time and then to switch gears, right? Because Slack's always going off, or your emails are always going off, or I'm needing to get on customer calls or other kinds of calls. So what I did, and I've always tended to try to structure my tools and my work.
Hi, I'm James Taylor, business creativity and innovation keynote speaker, and this is The Creative Life, a show dedicated to you, the creative. If you're looking for motivation, inspiration, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's an author, musician, entrepreneur, performer, designer, or thought leader. They'll share with you their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, and much, much more. You'll find show notes for this episode, as well as free training on creativity, over at jamestaylor.me. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have on the show Dr. Mik Kersten. Dr. Mik Kersten started his career as a research scientist at Xerox PARC, where he created the first aspect-oriented development environment. He then pioneered the integration of development tools with Agile and DevOps as part of his computer science PhD at the University of British Columbia. Founding Tasktop out of that research, Mik has written over 1 million lines of open source code that's still in use today. And he has brought 7 successful open source and commercial products to the market. He is the author of Project to Product, How to Survive and Thrive in the Age of Digital Disruption with the Flow framework. We're going to be learning all about that today. So first of all, Mik, welcome onto the show.
Thank you, James. It's great to be on.
So share with everyone what's been happening in your world.
The book has kind of exploded. To a point I didn't realize would happen. So it's got me flying all sorts of places, meeting all sorts of people, working a lot with technology executives and enterprise IT executives who are interested in how to help their businesses, again, thrive through this big age of disruption. So just doing a lot of talks, keynotes, and really interesting meetings. So the learnings, it feels like it's actually accelerated since the book. And it's just been a really, really interesting time. So
a lot of the computer scientists or software engineers I know, part of the reason for them doing that job is because they get to be on their own or in small teams to focus on doing kind of quiet work, being really focused on doing that. The idea of going out on speaking on stages is often quite a bit more of a foreign thing. So how have you, do you find that transition from the work that you do day to day to get kind of going up on stages and sharing your ideas and sharing your message? You find that a very easy transition?
Oh, that's actually really interesting because it's in the first part of my career, that first decade of my career, it was all kind of complete focus, minimizing any working with my colleagues as much as I could. And that's really what programming is about, right? If you want to be a prolific developer, I think it's probably kind of like being a prolific novelist. You're just spending a lot of time alone at a keyboard of some sort. So what happened to me is that truly was that first decade, the programming decade of my career was all about that, right? And the creative process was all around that. And I would do everything I could to maximize that time being in my flow of writing code. So, which is just basically writing in a different language, in a programming language. But what happened is when I realized that, we were onto something with the core ideas of the software that we were building, that I was building in my PhD, I realized I couldn't do it all alone. And so I founded a company with my PhD supervisor. This is back in 2007. And at that point, my working process changed because I was now working with people. I was needing to lead a team. I was needing to meet with customers. So this kind of like extroversion, the ratio of introversion to extroversion changed. Thankfully, changed fairly slowly. And I adjusted. And so because then I started giving conferences on stage, and it was a really big shift in terms of pulling myself out of the coding activities and into presenting in front of a bunch of people. So it took some adjustment, took some time, but then I spent a decade doing that, basically coding less and less, presenting and speaking and collaborating and doing teamwork more and more, and leadership and entrepreneurship type stuff more and more. And so that became kind of the new normal for me. And one of the most bizarre things I've actually experienced in my career was when I decided to write the book and I started writing the book again, for me to flip back from this always, speaking with people, engaging, being much more, my days be much more interactive, to writing the book and, spending like 9-10 hours a day, back at the keyboard, minimizing all distractions. So flipping back into that mode, that was really hard.
So how, now that you've kind of gone through those different stages of early in your career, it was very kind of more introverted, focused, deep focus, individual work you were doing, then becoming that manager, that leader of other people, having to be more collaborative. And now you have this, maybe this little bit of a kind of blend. I'm interested to know, do you divide up your days or your weeks in certain ways? Because I'm guessing to get in a sense, you talk a lot about flow, to get a sense of flow for doing more solo, individual, introverted work, as opposed to getting into flow when you're working with a team.
Yeah,
it's a different type of, it's flow, but it's a different type of flow. So how do you set up your week and your day in order to take advantage of that?
it is. So exactly. And it was writing the book while still continuing to be CEO of the company that I find, first of all, I found it excruciatingly difficult to find the flow time and then to switch gears, right? Because Slack's always going off, or your emails are always going off, or I'm needing to get on customer calls or other kinds of calls. So what I did, and I've always tended to try to structure my tools and my work fairly precisely for what I'm doing. So what I started doing, and I've actually kept doing it since the book, right? I stopped writing the book, or at least the intensive writing, almost a year ago, 10 months ago. So I started putting these different types of flow events in my calendar. And if it was the kind of flow of triaging the inbox, answering people on Slack or other instant messages, and doing all of that, those are my getting things done blocks of time. And I know those are interrupt driven. I'll take the highest priority thing, try to crank through it as quickly as I can, then move to the next. And then I have these flow blocks in my calendar. And the flow blocks are for my individual work. Like I will, whether I'll write a blog post now, I'll update a conference presentation, I'll write a memo to the company, something of that sort. So in my calendar, and I make those yellow because I enjoy them, and yellow is a happy color. So those are always yellow blocks in my calendar. On flights, that's my flow time as well, my individual time. So yeah, I've just become very, very specific about what my calendar looks like, and which is the sort of the collaborative work, the more interrupt-driven work, even if it's just me alone at the keyboard because I'm doing it over electronic media, versus the actual, my own personal creative time. And I find that actually separating those out gives me kind of predictability and calm, which is nice.
So is that something that you set like on Sunday evenings or Fridays, you set for your week ahead, or do you work a little bit longer than that? Do you try and you talk about these flow blocks, do you try and put those flow blocks in first and then put things around it? Do you find yourself, how do you do it? What works best for you?
Yeah, and it's evolved as my time commitments have evolved. So I'll have recurring events, and I've tried to read just all the best practices, the way clever people have structured their work days and so on. Where I've ended up is I do have recurring events. So every evening from 8:30 to 11:30 is my flow time, right? I will actively avoid working and answering too many emails at that time. I will do it for an hour, but then I'll stop. And I'll try to get a few things done. And of course, the other thing is I have to tailor it to my energy. This is the other thing I learned with writing the book, is for certain types of creative work, if I'm low energy, I can answer emails fine. I can't create interesting content, or, outline plan out a new initiative I'm doing, or do those sorts of things. So I do create recurring events in my calendar. And then I always look a week ahead, like you said, but I'll look at a week ahead on Monday and Wednesday and Friday. So I'll actually revisit it because things change so much for me right now. I've been traveling every single week for the last 3 months, or 4 months. So, and then I'll look at it daily again. I'll try to optimize my day for what I think my energy will be at which point of the day, depending, if I've moved time zones and so on. So, but it's quick, right? Like I can do it it's like the looking ahead and looking at the day. And of course I always do it the night before as well. So I think it sounds to me right now like I'm overdoing it, but, it helps.
I know a lot of developers I've worked with in the past, when I look at their workspaces, they're usually the workspace is usually pretty organized. The actual physical space, I mean, it might be messy, but it's actually, it works for them. They've kind of got
Yeah.
it. So I wonder, because you're on the road just now, you're speaking so much in order to promote the book. How does that change? Like when you get into that hotel room, after your flight, you basically just like clear everything off the desk in the hotel room and set up your own little bit of nirvana for those few hours, or are you quite happy just sitting there, just opening up the laptop and just working away when you can?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I was going to say no. Then I realized when I get into a hotel room, the first thing I do is I take all the junk and menus and magazines they put on the desk. I open the drawer and I shuffle them all into the drawer. Yeah. So I guess the answer is yes. And apparently I am obsessive about that. And my desk is completely clear other than like one or two books that I want to be, seeing around me because they bring me joy. But really for me, the bigger thing, I think the physical space is minor, because I'll be working on a plane. I'll be working at a busy restaurant all the time. And I actually enjoy that. I don't mind the noise. And it's nice and distracting sometimes as well. So I am just as careful about my digital environment, right? So that I am as uncluttered as I can be. So I've got, I close my browser tabs at least once a day. And I make sure that my inboxes and lists are also cleared. So I think that same kind of decluttering in organization that we do for physical spaces, for me, the bigger thing is doing that daily for my digital workspace. And
you mentioned there, like getting things done as well. Obviously, there's that whole kind of methodology that goes on there in terms of getting, inbox zero and all the different areas there as well. So your latest book is really all about this idea of digital disruption.
Yeah.
So for anyone, we hear this phrase, disruption, digital disruption. What does that phrase mean to you? And why did you decide to write this book at this particular point?
Yeah, so I used to be very focused on my individual productivity, and the thing I did for my PhD thesis is to make a developer productivity tool that put developers in the flow, that basically removed the distractions and the friction of their daily work and allowed them to spend as much time in the day as possible doing what they love doing, which is coding. So staying in the flow of their work that way. And then it turned out, and I think it was just really the time, because this was over 10 years ago, a lot of companies were starting their digital transformations. They were looking at, okay, these tech companies are becoming more important. What happened to Blockbuster? We don't want that to happen to us. And they started hiring more developers. And so larger companies, larger enterprises became interested in the work that we were doing at my company at Tasktop. And by virtue of working with them, with empathizing with the people who were at these companies like Nokia, that was our first big enterprise client, that I started seeing this massive disconnect between what I thought was productivity for an individual developer. And remember, coding and just software delivery in general, they're a creative process. It's nothing like manufacturing the same car over and over. You're actually creating. What makes it difficult and interesting is that it has to do with conversation, collaboration, and creating new information at every moment, right? You're not generating anything relevant unless you're writing code. And you can't write code unless you've got a nice user interface design and so on. So I started realizing that there was something about the fact that these companies, the same way that I saw individuals not being in the flow of their work and being blocked by waiting for something, waiting for a deployment environment, waiting for a library, waiting for a user, screen design, user interface design to be completed. These companies were in like this perpetual state of waiting and thrashing. So you had these large companies with thousands or tens of thousands of developers, none of whom could do the right thing. None of whom could, all those developers at Nokia who should have been really creating that big screen experience, but couldn't for reasons that no one understood at the time, while Apple was doing it, back in 2006, 2007. So I realized that we needed to bring flow, not just to the individual, but to the organization as a whole, and came up with this concept of value streams and basically how value needs to flow through a creative process in an organization in order to bring great digital products to market. And I realized that organizations who master that kind of flow at scale of delivering value to their customers, those are the organizations who will succeed in this massive age of disruptions, whereas the ones who don't, and are the ones who will fail. So take retail, for example, right? We've had companies, it's not that companies like Sears in the US and Canada, it's not that they didn't know digital was happening and that people were buying stuff off Amazon. Those companies have just been very slow to figure out how to become digital and to create these digital offerings. And so I realized if companies continue to be as slow as they are today in becoming and being able to basically deliver digital products with any kind of flow and efficiency, then we would end up with most of the economy being owned by the tech giants, right? Because those companies have figured out how to deliver software at scale. And if you take the FANGs, the tech giants in the US, and you take the BATs like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent in China, you already have a GDP equivalent of the size of Japan, the third largest economy of the world, right? And startups are even having trouble competing with that in terms of where we are in this age of software, which the book talks about a fair amount. So I just realized we have to, the same way before I had a mission to bring that flow to individual developers, I realized that this next mission for me and my company and my colleagues was to bring this kind of flow to the world organizations to master software at scale. So because fundamentally that's a much better thing for those companies, all the people who work there, and for the world economy.
So the other day I was speaking in Istanbul for a large bank, a large Middle East bank, and I met with the chairman. I was having a conversation with the chairman before I was speaking, and he took me down to an innovation lab that they have within the bank, where they're getting employees of the bank and also external partners, bringing them in. They can bid in order to essentially be in this incubator within it. If you're an employee, you get 6 months completely away just to focus on building this product or this service within it, with the idea that, listen, we're going to be disrupted. We might as well disrupt ourselves rather than have others disruptors as well. They were kind of taking that particular approach to doing things, but they said one of the hardest things for them was not that there was a lack of expertise, and they had some very good expertise internally and also externally they were bringing in, was actually more of a mindset thing than anything else. So when you're working with, I think of engineers and the people that come from the tech side, there's a certain kind of mindset. Coders are looking to create really good code, like beautiful, like, I don't know, you describe it, but beautiful, but really clean.
They would, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful code. And there's a certain way of thinking. There's an approach to doing that. There's there's that side of things. And you've got this other side, which is maybe from the traditional side, let's say from the banking world, in this case, who come at it from a completely different. How do you take these two tribes, what could feel like two tribes, and bring them together around creating that type of value chain together and getting into flow together when they've maybe operated at very different wavelengths over the years? Yeah.
So I think this is a really interesting thing. So first of all, one of the things that Project to Product says is that there's a managerial model in place at these large companies, like these large banks, that's completely flawed and broken. So, and that's project management. And so project management is great for repeatable tasks that are actually low complexity. So if you want to build a building or a dam, and project management, one of the places where things like Gantt charts came from, or were first used at scale, was building the Hoover Dam, like building these very large things. And you truly can. You can build, the Burj Khalifa with project management methodologies, because it's a repeatable process in which you can use people effectively like resources and cogs, right? You can interchange contractors, laborers, and so on. And software is not that. Software is a creative discipline, because at each point you're doing design, you're creation, you're learning from your market, right? That's what the tech companies and tech startups have become so good at doing, is basically getting that flow and feedback. And these are the principles of a movement that Project to Product is a part of, called DevOps. Flow, and the three principles are flow, feedback, and continual learning. Now, this is how you actually become a software innovator. You master the creative process. The problem is that if you're actually doing project management, you're assuming it's not a creative process. You're assuming you can treat people as resources. You're assuming time tracking is a good way to manage costs. And rather than sort of learning an iteration and a product orientation where you're focused on your customer and just always delivering value to your customer. You're focused on the flow of value to the customer. So what's happened is the vast majority of large organizations out there, be they banks, healthcare companies, governments, retailers, they use project management to manage how they deliver software, and it kills creativity. It creates the cultural problems that I can talk to, which it sounds like you witnessed some of, and it basically sets them up for failure. Whereas shifting to a product mindset and to a mindset of value stream flow, which is again product value streams, and this is, by the way, how automotive companies, what manufacturers already understand, which is you don't focus on projects, you focus on how much value you flow to an end customer according to each product value stream that you care about at a business or strategic level. So this is how tech companies are already aligned, and this is how startups that have grown up in this age of software have been set up. And if these larger companies don't shift away from this project-oriented mindset, they will never create the kind of culture or creativity or infrastructure needed for software development to thrive.
So how does something like DevOps differ from that you're talking about, and what you talk about in project product? How does that differ from, let's say, kind of lean startup style methodology or kind of agile ways of, Kanban, agile ways of management? How do all these things kind of fit together, or do they fit together at all?
They do. They're all basically similar sides of the same coin, which is allowing your organization to iterate faster, to learn from a market or a customer. That's what Agile is about. DevOps takes some of the principles of Agile and really applies them to the technical processes of delivering software. So you can deliver quickly, test quickly, learn quickly, and really flow quickly. Now, what project to product does, and then of course, lean startup, right? Lean startup, when some of the tools that come out of that, or actually came before it, like lean canvases, those give you a framework for faster hypothesis testing. So you've got all those things, and all those concepts are key. Project to product actually gives you a thing that layers over all the principles of Agile and DevOps to track flow. So there's this thing in the book, that the book's really a vehicle for something called the flow framework, which is how you track flow through these things called flow metrics of business value to your customer. Rather than tracking the more delighted aspect of Agile and DevOps, it's really meant to give you a way of saying, are we moving things fast enough to actually do hypothesis testing on whether this feature delights users more than that feature? So it really layers over top of those things, and it's meant to displace project management at these organizations.
That more traditional waterfall style project management you see in a lot of companies. So tell me, in your own creative journey, as first as a developer, then as a CEO of a company and author, speaker, was there a key aha moment or light bulb moment in your career when you went, okay, this is what I want to focus on. This is where I think I can add the most value into the world?
Yeah, there've been a few. I actually documented 3 of these light bulb moments in the book. The first one was when I first took that software, and I had been using open source developers to test, to basically run experiments during my PhD. But for me, the biggest learning was in taking that software towards the end of it. I had need to do one more user study, and I did it on professional developers. And what I learned, and then I did interviews after. And what I learned, I stayed awake that whole night because it was such an aha moment. I couldn't sleep because I'd learned that, okay, this could make a really big difference in this particular way. And that's a little bit different than what I'd been thinking, but it was really, I got out of my bubble of working with, when you're an open source developer, you work with tons of open source developers out there, right? You're collaborating, not in real time, but over digital channels constantly. But actually having the people use the software for a week and then interviewing them face to face, it really kind of broke me out of my bubble. And it was one of my biggest aha moments, and it actually got me on the journey of founding the company. That was the moment I decided, okay, there's something here. I want to start a company around this. And I actually find my aha, this you'll actually get this from people like Steve Blank, whose work went into the lean startup. Yeah. But for me, the creativity, the inspiration comes from outside the building. Yeah. So it comes from meeting, and generally face to face. I kind of wish it wasn't because I could fly less, but face to face with a person, who is actually sharing with you their problem, their context, their learning. And what I always do is I bring up until Apple released that big new iPad Pro, I always brought up a piece of loose leaf paper and a pen, and it would just sketch out. Because for me, I'm more visual, so I just sketch out what I was learning from this person in this particular meeting, in this discussion, and whatever it was. And yeah, all of these kind of inspirations and learnings tend to come from meeting someone, one of our customers, some smart person I was speaking with somewhere, and then just kind of sketching out that conversation on a piece of paper, or now on my iPad Pro.
I remember seeing a stat the other day that they said only 18% of your good ideas will come when you're sitting in front of a computer, of a display.
Oh, really?
I can't. I've been trying to track down this stat. I heard it the other day, and I want to find out where it comes from, just in case it's one of those, that famous stat which says only 4% of your communication is actually the words that you say.
Yeah.
And actually, that's been proven
non-verbal,
to be completely wrong. That stat, it was made up in the 1950s. It's totally wrong, but it gets repeated. So before I quote that 18% too much, I want to find out if it's actually true or not. And so if anyone watching, listening to this, and you can tell me where that is, please let me know. So
and I'll give you one data point, James, which is, for me, it's no higher than 8%. So
8%, yeah,
8, yeah. So for me, the inspiration, the creativity, it's all, and I feel like the work you put in front of the screen in your work actually sets you up for learning from that person. Somehow they'll challenge or reframe what you're thinking. But yeah, all the big moments, they're always external.
In other places. So as we start to finish up here, I would love to know, you mentioned some tools a second ago, like Slack, for example. What tools do you find very useful in doing the work that you do, either apps or online tools?
Well, for me, the big thing, and this is really part of the ethos of the book, right, is that you've got, for wherever you are in the value stream, you've got the visibility that you need to learn what you need and to communicate and collaborate what you need. And back when I was a developer, that meant I needed to be connected to, basically have as close to connection to the customer as possible. So communicating with tickets and service desk items and so on. Right now I need to be connected to my staff and to our customers as well. So I, basically find like the tools are getting better at this, but none of them are perfect. So I think, what we've been doing at Tasktop is adding this tool aggregation layer, because the communication is so many different places. And the other thing that's really key is that the tools are now right sizing to the size of companies. So Slack's a great tool for us at our size with 150, 160 people. But it's much less common in large organizations, right? So I think the bigger thing is actually understanding, it's not as much the tools themselves, because there's so many similar tools for similar functions right now. Depending where you are in the world, right? I've got some customers who, or some people I collaborate with who are fully, still kind of stuck on email and Exchange of the Microsoft stack, versus, I was in Tel Aviv last week, and I don't think they know how to spell email anymore, because everyone's on WhatsApp,
yeah,
for work, right? So I think the big thing is, for me, it's mastering the tools. Change so quickly right now as well. It's mastering the concepts above the tools that's so important. So getting a handle on your notifications, I feel like that's, they should teach that in high school now, right? That's one of the key things you need to survive in this digital age. And that will work for any tool. Just like making sure that you've got the right kind of task management tool for what you do, but that's somehow connected, right? And you can maybe use Trello for if you've got other people on that, or you use something like it. So I think the really big thing for me right now is making sure that for each category of tool, like your calendaring, your messaging, your task management, you've got the right thing. And then I probably change tools every 3 months, right? That's something new comes into the company or something new comes out. So,
and if you were to recommend one book to our listeners, and also one album, one record, one album, what would those be?
Oh, okay. I'm looking at my good stack of books. So, I'm going to suggest a strange one, because I'm sure you've got that others probably wouldn't suggest, but I saw my book at a bookstore next to it, and it's been one of my favorite books. That's the books that's influenced me the most, and it's The Essential Drucker. And it's older, but the things I keep reading and rereading Peter Drucker, and I realized there's more wisdom as a manager and an entrepreneur in those books than in most of the other entrepreneurial literature that I read. There's lots of great stuff out there. I just handed The Hard Thing About Hard Things to one of our executives because I think it's such a great and motivational book, and especially when you're scaling or growing or having hardships. But the Essential Drucker, it's one that I think often gets skipped, that to me is, in terms of appreciating, learning the role and value of management, it was really, really eye-opening to me. It really helped me make that transition from individual contributor to leader as well. So.
And then what would the album be? What would that record be? What music do you listen to when you want to get into the flow, or do you listen to any music at all?
Well, funny that you say that. So yeah, I listen to music all the time. I basically don't work without listening to music. And when I'm in my kind of getting things done, cranking through email and messages mode, it's just all various kinds of house music. And when I'm writing, it's all Baroque music. So
really?
Yeah.
House to Baroque. That's a
yeah. I don't know how I've landed on those two. But Giuliano Carmignola, he's my favorite in terms of the kind of Bach and other Baroque music. He's just
great.
Amazing.
And we'll put that down. Actually, I think that makes a lot of sense, because obviously the Baroque side does activate a part of the brain, especially around creativity and learning. And house music is almost, it's like shaman type thing. It kind of just is, because it's quite similar. It's repetitive in that sense. And it has a slightly different task that's going on. Final question for you. Let's imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and you have to start from scratch. So you have all the skills, all the knowledge you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you. You know no one. What would you do? How would you restart things?
I think, I guess it'd be similar to, I'd probably try to repeat some of what worked for me before, which is to look at what really interests me right now and drives my passion. And then to learn as much as I can from as many people as I can by doing as much work as I can on that topic. I find that's whenever I felt like I wasn't sure where things were going, like when I was switching from the open source project to going, okay, this thing's going to dead end at some point because the platforms we're building on are changing and the world's changing. That's what I did. I looked at, what do I think is most impactful right now? And how much can I learn about that thing? So I think I would do that same thing, just run that process of figuring out what I'm passionate about in terms of contribution or impact, and then talking to as much people who know about that, going to those conferences, reading up on them, following their blogs and so on, and then doing real work in that area as well. Which for my case might be programming, but I don't think I'd go back to programming at this point. I think I'd actually go into just some lean startup hypothesis testing probably. So.
Fantastic. Well, Mik, thank you so much for coming on the show today, sharing all about your creative life. What's the best way for people if they want to connect with you, learn more about the work that you're doing? Yeah,
so just Twitter at Mik_Kersten, or just hit me up on LinkedIn as well. And I eventually get to all my LinkedIn replies.
That's great. Well, Mik, thanks so much for coming on today. I wish you all the best with the book and all the best with your business as well. Look forward to catching up again soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, James.
If you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.